shortly after midnight on October 31st, 1966 in the Kinloss Barracks in northern Scotland. Something the military had dug up years earlier awakened later. That night evil was unleashed on the nearby town of Foss. What happened that night was kept a secret for decades. One of the survivors, Virgil Adamson, who experienced the terror firsthand, told his story years later. His story has been transcribed from the original document to present day American English. Some wording has been changed ever since I was a little boy. The day before Halloween, my mother would always tell me the same frightening tale. She would also never let me dress up or go out trick-or-treating. I assumed it was because she didn't want me going out after dark on that night, or she simply didn't like Halloween. On October 31st, 1966, I found out why she'd always told me that story and what she was trying to protect me from. I just turned 40 years old the day before, and instead of buying something for myself, I'd bought some goodies for the kids should any show up at my front door. Once it got dark, several kids came to my door, and in between kids coming, I'd sit on my couch reading a book. Well, it didn't take long for me to fall asleep. I wasn't sure how long I'd been out when I heard another knock on my door. It jolted me awake. On sent the book I've been reading to the floor. I was living alone at the time, so it was up to me to get up and answer the door. Welcome to Darkrot Legends ... where fear takes form and shadows tell their stories. Let's begin. As I slowly got up from the couch, I said loudly, "Be right there, don't go anywhere." I walked over to the door, grabbed the bowl holding the goodies, and opened the door, expecting to see kids standing there, but there was no one. I looked up and down the street but saw nothing. There was no one out and about. I shrugged it off as kids playing a Halloween trick on me, which made me let out a slight chuckle. I shut the door and glanced over at the clock and was surprised to see it was already 11 o'clock. I'd been asleep for a while. I thought. I walked back over to the couch to read some more before going to bed, when suddenly I heard a slight scream that was quickly cut off. Then what sounded like the cracking of wood coming from my backyard. I immediately stopped. As I stood there, I knew I needed to go check what the noise was, but my body seemed to be frozen in place, and the story my mother told me every Halloween came flooding into my mind. A few minutes of very silence went by before I was able to muster the courage to walk over to my back door. I flipped on the outside light, took a deep breath, and reached out to grab the handle. As I slowly opened the door, I gasped as I couldn't believe what laid there before me. It was a young teenage boy, from what I guessed being he was in a costume. His rib cage had been ripped open and his heart taken out. I quickly knew this by looking, because I was a coroner. I slammed the door and locked it, then ran over to the phone to call the police, when suddenly the lights in my house went out. It was then I heard the horrific screams of kids coming from somewhere behind my house, possibly on the next street. I picked up the phone, but it was dead. There was no dial tone. I dropped it and ran back to the window to see if I could see who was making the screams. I looked all around, but there was no one in sight. I could see all of my neighbors. Well, by this time I was so scared and shaking so bad I thought I might pissing my pants. I stood there by the window trying to decide what my next course of action should be. The police station was not close, and I didn't want to set foot outside, not even to get to my car. As I stood there thinking, I suddenly heard what sounded like scratching on my front door. I quickly turned around, staring at the door, frozen with fear. I looked over to the stairs that led up to my bedroom and said to myself, "Run upstairs, damn you." After a few seconds I was able to make my body move and took off running up the stairs as fast as I could. Once inside my room, I slammed the door and moved my large dresser in front of it, blocking it so nothing could get inside. As I backed up away from the door, I heard the sound of glass breaking downstairs and assumed someone or something had broken a window and was now inside my house. Minutes of silence went by before I heard the sound of running footsteps Coming from downstairs, it wasn't long before I heard them coming up the stairs. I thought about hiding in the closet but decided that wasn't a good idea in case I needed to hold the dresser against the door. As I stood there trembling, I kept thinking to myself, go hold the dresser, go hold the dresser. My legs wouldn't obey me though. Suddenly, without warning, something grabbed the door handle and started violently shaking the door, trying to get in. Without thinking, I ran over to the dresser and kept it pushed against the door with all my strength. Whatever was on the other side, I wasn't about to get into my room. This went on for about a minute when I blurted out, "Who the hell are you? What do you want?" The shaking abruptly stopped and I heard what sounded like a woman laughing. Then the scratching again. It was slow, hard scratching like someone had a pitchfork and they were raking it up and down my door. I'm not sure how long this went on before I heard the sounds of kids outside. I could hear them laughing and talking as they walked down the street. The scratching immediately stopped and whatever it was that had been trying to get into my room took off, running down the stairs towards the kids outside. I yelled out, "No, no, no!" As I pulled the dresser away from my door, I flung the door open and started running down the stairs as I heard the hideous screams coming from the kids. As I made my way outside and looked to my right, not too far away, I could make out in the moonlight what looked like a woman crouched down over a child. She was moving her arms in a violent manner and making the most god-awful noise. I yelled out, "Hey, stop that!" She immediately stopped what she was doing and slowly turned her head, looking back at me. I was in utter shock as it appeared to be a beautiful pale-skinned, red-haired woman. I noticed some dark stuff smeared on her face. It appeared to be blood and her mouth was covered in it. She slowly stood up, turned and started calmly walking towards me. I had backed up and she got closer and knew I needed to turn and run, but there was something about her that captivated me. I happened to glance over towards the child. She'd been crouched over and could see the same thing had happened to him. His rib cage had been ripped wide open and I assumed his heart had been taken as well. I finally came to my senses, turned and started running away from her. As I ran, I heard her make the same sinister laugh as before. I didn't have a plan, I just ran and ran. I thought about running into my home again and doing what I did before, but I wasn't sure the dresser would even stop her from getting into my room. After running for what seemed like forever, I had to stop to catch my breath. I bent over and gasped for air as I was not accustomed to running. Once I caught my breath, I continued walking swiftly down the road, constantly looking over my shoulder. After passing a small grove of trees, I could see the Kinloss barracks to my left and couldn't believe I'd run that far. A sense of relief overcame me as I knew the military personnel there could help protect me. I turned and walked down the road that led to the gate. As I got closer to the gate, I could see the barracks lights were off and it was completely dark. The gate was also slightly ajar, which I thought was strange given the number of times I've driven or walked past and it was never open, and I knew it shouldn't be. There were usually men posted at the gate checking people before allowing entry. They were not there either. As I slowly pushed the gate open and walked through, a sense of dread overcame me and I thought about turning back, but going back to town wasn't an option. It wasn't too far of a walk to the main building. As I cautiously approached it, when I got close enough, I could see one of the doors leading into the side of the building was open. As I walked up to it, I could see what looked like blood on it. Before going inside, I stuck my head inside and said, "Hello, anybody here?" I stood there quietly waiting for a reply, but there was nothing but silence. I'd never been inside the barracks before and had no idea where I should go. My plan was to simply find anyone that could help me or communicate with someone who could bring help. As I stepped inside, it was quiet. Too quiet. I knew there were usually about 50 men stationed here all the time. There were a few dimly lit lights on due to a backup generator, I'd guessed, but it was still hard to see in some areas, and from what I could tell, I was in the mess hall there were 2 different doors I could see, so I crept along to the nearest one in hopes I'd find someone on the other side. When I reached the door, I tried slowly pushing it open at first, but it would only budge slightly, so I started pushing harder and finally it started to move. When I'd opened it far enough, I stuck my head inside to see if I could see anything like the mess hall. There were a few dimly lit lights on in the room. As I looked down in front of me and around the room, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The bodies of men covered the floor, and just like I'd seen back in town, their rib cages had been ripped open. Right then I heard someone say, "Hello, is someone out there?" It sounded like a woman's voice coming from behind a door somewhere inside the room. "Yes, my name is Virgil and I need help. There's a strange woman in town killing people. It looks like she was here first, judging by the bodies of these men and how they were killed. I'm coming out," she said. Then I heard a door start to creak as it opened. I looked over and could see a door opening on the past side of the room, and out stepped a woman who appeared to be dressed in military clothing. "Yes, you're correct. She was here first. Her name is Cláruith. We've had her body here for many years. She used to be a powerful druidess and is the daughter of Cláruith," she said. "I know of her, but she's been dead for centuries. How the hell is she now alive?" I asked. "I don't know. I'm a scientist and my colleague and I have been studying her body over the last several months. When we came back to the room late last night where her body is kept, it was just gone. It wasn't long after we heard the horrible shrieks of men," she replied. "Are you the only one left?" I asked. "Yes, she killed everyone but me." I came face to face with her as she stood there looking at me. She then turned and walked away. She replied, "Why do you suspect she didn't kill you?" I asked. "This is only a theory, but it's my guess. It's because I'm female. I can't say for certain though, because I'm the only female here at the barracks. You see, the old stories say that Cla was raped on All Hallows Eve by the 3 sons of Simon Maga. She then gave birth to their unwanted triplets right before dying. I think she's risen to seek revenge on men," she responded. "That's hard to believe, but after what I've seen tonight, I'm not sure what to think or believe. I know we need to call for help and get them here fast." I said. "Help is on the way. A squad of 12 highly trained women soldiers are coming." I was able to radio to my superiors, and it took a bit of coaxing and explaining as to why I wanted only females, but whatever I said must have convinced them enough. She said, "When did this all happen?" I asked. "Just after midnight, right as we entered All Hallows Eve. I must request you stay here when help arrives if she's in town. Like you say, I doubt she come back here," she replied. She then had me follow her to a part of the barracks where she thought I'd be kept the safest. As I stepped over the bodies of the men, I could see their hearts had in fact been ripped out as well. It wasn't long after that the 12 female soldiers arrived. As I came into the room I was staying in, I could see they were all armed and looked fierce. The one I assumed was a leader of the 12 had me tell them everything I'd seen. I could tell by the looks on some of their faces. Not all of them believed what I had said, but there was no denying the bodies of the slaughtered men that riddled the barracks. The female scientist, whose name I never got then, said she was going with them and I was to lock the door behind them as she handed me the key. Should they not return, I'm to come out in 12 hours, as more soldiers should have arrived at the barracks by then. Waiting in that room was the hardest and longest time of my entire life. There was only a clock and a small lantern I used on and off. As I waited, hours went by before I finally heard a knock on the door and the voice of the female scientist saying it was safe to come out. As I inserted the key to unlock the door, the thought I was being tricked by Cla went through my mind, but I didn't care if all of the female soldiers were dead. Then it wouldn't be long before I was also. As I opened the door, I saw the welcoming face of the female scientist looking at me. I let out a sigh of relief as I handed the key back to her. "What happened? What did you find in town?" I asked. "All I can say is that it's Been taken care of, I'm sorry I can say, no more she, replied I, then followed her to another room where the 12 female soldiers were at and sat down. They all looked like they'd been through hell in back, and some of them were covered in blood. The leader of the 12 then said we took care of the problem and cleaned up the horrible mess she made in town. You're not to breath a word of this to anybody, is that understood? Virgil, I simply nodded my head and said, yes ma'am, understood. I didn't know what else to say, and with everything that had happened I wasn't about to argue with her. The leader of the 12 then looked at one of the female soldiers and instructed her to give me a ride back home. When I stepped outside I could see the sun was starting to rise. That was a most welcoming sight. As we drove back to my home we didn't utter a word to each other. There were so many questions I wanted to ask, but knew I shouldn't. When she pulled up to my house, she said, "Here you are, sir." I thanked her, got out, walked straight into my house, and headed towards the back door. I immediately opened the door to see if the body of the young teenage boy was still there, but there was no trace he'd ever been there. I went and sat down on the couch and remained there until late afternoon, at which point I couldn't hold it back any longer. My curiosity was killing me. The first went outside, got in my car, and proceeded to drive towards the Kinloss barracks. When it came within sight I could see trucks and military personnel everywhere. They'd set up a large perimeter, not allowing anyone to get close, so I stopped, turned the car around, and went back home. I didn't sleep much that night, or much at all, for several months after that. It still haunts me to this very day. I never got the answers I was seeking and never spoke of it again until today. That is, the scratch marks she made on my doors are still there. I left them there as a reminder. For more scary horror stories, please subscribe.